January 10, 1940, a Messerschmitt Bf 108 tears through Belgian airspace, its engine sputtering. Inside, two Luftwaffe officers carrying documents that could end Hitler's war before it begins. The plane crashes near Mechelon-sur-Meuse. Within hours, Belgian intelligence holds Germany's complete invasion plan. The French receive it days later. They read it, they analyze it, and then they do nothing. How could the Allies possess Hitler's playbook and still lose France in 6 weeks? The snow fell thick over Mechelon-sur-Meuse that January morning in 1940, blanketing the Belgian countryside in silence. At 11:30 a.m., that silence shattered. A German Messerschmitt Bf 108, lost in fog and running on fumes, screamed over the frozen fields before nose-diving into a farm near the town. Local farmers sprinted toward the wreckage, expecting carnage. Instead, they found two Luftwaffe officers stumbling from the twisted metal, dazed but alive. Major Helmuth Rheinberger clutched a leather briefcase to his chest like his life depended on it, because it did. Inside that case were operational orders for Fall Gelb, Case Yellow, the complete blueprint for Germany's invasion of France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Belgian soldiers arrived within minutes, rifles raised, surrounding the Germans. Rheinberger's hands shook as he reached for his lighter, desperately trying to ignite the documents. Flames licked the paper edges, but Belgian Captain Arthur Roderick lunged forward, ripping the smoldering papers from Rheinberger's grasp and stamping out the fire. The Major's face went white. He knew what he'd just lost. The documents, 70 pages of operational orders, troop movements, invasion routes and timetables, were now in enemy hands. By nightfall, they sat on the desk of Belgian intelligence headquarters in Brussels. By January 12th, French intelligence officers in Paris held photocopies. The papers detailed everything. The German assault would bypass the Maginot Line entirely, striking through Belgium with mechanized panzer divisions supported by overwhelming air power. The main thrust would come through the Ardennes forest, terrain the French High Command considered impassable for tanks. 3 Panzer Corps would punch through near Sedan, cross the Meuse River, and race toward the English Channel, severing Allied armies in Belgium from reinforcements in France. It was audacious, unprecedented, and written in excruciating detail. German units were named, commanders identified, routes mapped, timelines specified down to the hour. Colonel Maurice-Henri Gauchet, head of French military intelligence, reviewed the documents in his Paris office, cigar smoke curling toward the ceiling. Across from him sat General Maurice Gamelin, Supreme Commander of Allied forces, a 67-year-old relic of the First World War. Gamelin adjusted his spectacles, reading slowly. When he finished, he set the papers down and leaned back in his chair. "Interesting," he muttered. "But too obvious. The Germans wouldn't be so foolish as to reveal their actual plans. This is disinformation, gentlemen, a plant. They want us to believe they'll attack through Belgium, so we weaken our defenses elsewhere." Gauchet frowned. "Sir, our analysts believe these documents are authentic. The level of detail is extraordinary. Unit designations match confirmed German deployments along the border. If this is real, if this were real—" Gamelin interrupted, his voice sharp. "Hitler would have changed his plans the moment that plane crashed. It's been weeks, Colonel. Do you truly believe the Germans would proceed with an operation the enemy has read cover to cover? No, this is a ruse. We proceed with Plan D. Plan D, the Dial Plan, was France's defensive strategy, a relic of 1914 thinking applied to 1940 realities. When Germany attacked, French and British forces would rush into Belgium, establishing a defensive line along the Dial River. The bulk of Allied mobile forces, the cream of the French army, including 7 mechanized divisions and the entire British Expeditionary Force, would advance into Belgium to meet the Germans head-on. Meanwhile, the Ardennes sector would be held by second-rate divisions, older reservists with minimal anti-tank weapons. The forest itself, Gamelin insisted, was impenetrable to armored vehicles. No commander in his right mind would send tanks through 70 miles of dense woodland and narrow roads. The French intelligence officers exchanged glances. Captain Paul Pelliol, a sharp-minded analyst who'd spent years tracking German rearmament, spoke carefully. "General, what if the Germans are counting on us dismissing this as fake? What if the plan is real and they're gambling we won't believe it?" Gamelin smiled thinly. "Captain, I've been fighting Germans since before you were born. I know how they think. They are methodical, predictable, slaves to doctrine. This," he tapped the documents, "is too creative for the German General Staff. Mark my words, the real attack will come north, through the Low Countries, just as it did in 1914. We'll meet them there and hold." Dismissed. The meeting ended. The papers were filed. Copies circulated through Allied intelligence networks, reaching British and Belgian commands. Reaction was mixed. Some officers, particularly younger mechanized warfare advocates, saw chilling plausibility in the German plan. The Ardennes thrust, the Sedan breakthrough, the race to the Channel. It matched emerging German doctrine emphasizing speed, shock, and armored exploitation. But the old guard, generals who'd commanded divisions at Verdun and the Somme, dismissed it as fantasy. Tanks couldn't operate in forests. Mechanized armies needed paved roads, logistics chains, fuel depots. The Ardennes offered none of that. Besides, if the plan were real, surely Hitler would have postponed the invasion after the Mechelen incident. The fact that German forces remained positioned along the border proved the documents were bait. Throughout February and March 1940, intelligence reports continued flowing into Allied headquarters. German reconnaissance flights probed Belgian airspace. Panzer divisions massed near the Luxembourg border, exactly where the captured documents said they'd be. Aerial photographs showed German engineers building pontoon bridges in sectors facing the Ardennes. Every indicator confirmed the authenticity of the Mechelen plans. Yet Gamelin remained unmoved. He reinforced the dial line, stripped divisions from the Ardennes sector to bolster mobile forces in Belgium, and waited for the real German attack, the one his experience told him must come through open country in the north. In Germany, panic had indeed swept through Wehrmacht headquarters when news of the Mechelen crash reached Berlin. Hitler raged, threatening court-martials and executions. Generals argued for scrapping Fall Gelb entirely, devising new plans from scratch. But weeks passed, and Allied deployments didn't change. French forces remained concentrated for a drive into Belgium. The Ardennes sector stayed lightly defended. Slowly, astonishingly, German commanders realized the truth. The Allies thought it was fake. They didn't believe Germany would be stupid enough to proceed with a compromised plan. Hitler made a fateful decision. They'd proceed with Fall Gelb, with modifications. General Erich von Manstein's alternative plan, which concentrated even more panzer divisions for the Ardennes thrust, was adopted. If the French expected an attack through Belgium, they'd get one, but it would be a feint. The real hammer blow would fall exactly where the captured document said, through the Ardennes, across the Meuse at Sedan, and onto the Channel coast. The Allies had the playbook. They'd studied it, analyzed it, and decided it was impossible. That arrogance would cost them everything. Spring 1940 arrived with deceptive calm. Along the French-German border, soldiers manned bunkers, played cards, and waited. The phony war, 8 months of military stalemate following Poland's fall, dragged on. In Paris, cafes remained full, theaters sold tickets, civilians conducted business as usual. The war felt distant, theoretical, someone else's problem. But in Allied military headquarters scattered across northeastern France and Belgium, tension simmered beneath surface calm. Officers pored over maps, ran logistics calculations, rehearsed deployment schedules. When Germany struck, and everyone knew it would strike, the Allies had to be ready. At Château de Vincennes outside Paris, General Gamelin commanded from an underground bunker complex that resembled a First World War relic more than a modern command center. No radio communications equipment, no direct telephone lines to forward units. Messages traveled by motorcycle courier, sometimes taking hours to reach field commanders. Gamelin preferred it this way. Modern technology, he believed, created confusion. Better to rely on established procedures, clear chains of command, methodical staff work. His headquarters ran on schedules and protocols unchanged since 1918. French defensive doctrine reflected this mindset. The Maginot Line, 250 miles of concrete fortifications, underground railways, and artillery casemates stretching along the German border, embodied French military thinking. Static defense, attrition warfare, bleeding the enemy white against fixed positions. It had cost 5 billion francs, consumed a decade of construction, and represented everything French commanders believed about modern war. Tanks were infantry support weapons, dispersed among divisions to help foot soldiers advance. Armored divisions, massed formations of tanks operating independently, were experiments, untested theories embraced by mavericks like Colonel Charles de Gaulle, but dismissed by serious military professionals. The problem was Belgium. The Maginot Line ended at the Belgian border because Belgium, until 1936, had been a French ally. Building fortifications along the Franco-Belgian border would have insulted a partner. Then Belgium declared neutrality, forbidding Allied forces from entering until Germany actually invaded. This left a 200-mile gap, the Belgian plain and the Ardennes forest, completely unfortified. Gamelin's solution was Plan D. When Germany attacked, French mechanized divisions and the British Expeditionary Force would race into Belgium, linking up with Belgian forces along the Dyle River. It was a defensive strategy that required offensive movement, the worst of both worlds. Intelligence continued flowing in. On March 15, 1940, a French agent in Switzerland forwarded reports from a contact in German military circles. The main attack would come through the Ardennes, near Sedan, just as the Mechelen documents indicated. On April 2nd, Polish intelligence, some of the best in Europe, sent Paris a detailed breakdown of German panzer deployments. 7 armored divisions concentrated in a narrow sector facing Luxembourg and southern Belgium. The weight of this force, the Polish report concluded, indicates the main effort will be here, not in the north. Captain Payol presented these findings to Gamelin's staff on April 8th. He spread maps across the conference table, marking German positions with red pins. Gentlemen, every intelligence source confirms it. The captured documents were authentic. The Germans are going to punch through the Ardennes, cross the Meuse at Sedan, and drive west. We're putting our best divisions in Belgium, leaving second-rate forces to hold the critical sector. Colonel Gaucher nodded slowly. I agree, the evidence is compelling. General, we should reinforce the Ardennes. Station at least 2 armored divisions near Sedan, position anti-tank guns. Enough. Gamelin's voice cut through the room like a blade. The Ardennes is impassable to armor. I've been over this terrain myself. Narrow roads, dense forest, steep ravines, perfect for defense, impossible for attack. Yes, the Germans have panzer divisions near Luxembourg. Why? To tie down our forces, make us worry about a sector where no real threat exists. The main attack will come through Belgium, where geography favors mobile operations. We hold the Ardennes with minimum forces and concentrate strength where it matters. That is final. The meeting ended. Officers filed out, frustration etched on younger faces. The old guard, Gamelin's contemporaries, men who'd commanded battalions in 1916, nodded approval. Of course, the general was right. You don't send tanks through forests. Military history proved it. Common sense confirmed it. The Germans were predictable, methodical. They'd attack through open country in the north, just like 1914, and the Allies would be waiting. Meanwhile, across the border in Germany, final preparations accelerated. Throughout April, Wehrmacht logistics officers worked 18-hour days, positioning fuel dumps, ammunition stocks, bridging equipment, and medical facilities along roads leading to the Ardennes. Panzer crews conducted rehearsals, Practicing river crossings and breakthrough tactics, Luftwaffe units transferred to forward airfields in Western Germany, ready to provide close air support. The German plan was breathtakingly ambitious. Panzer Group Kleist, 1,250 tanks organized into 7 armored divisions, would traverse the Ardennes in 3 days, cross the Meuse River on day 4, and then exploit westward, racing 200 miles to the English Channel in less than 2 weeks. It required perfect coordination, relentless speed, and acceptance of massive risk. Supply lines would stretch dangerously thin. Flanks would be exposed. A determined counterattack could cut off the spearhead, isolating German armor deep in enemy territory. But Wehrmacht planners were gambling the French wouldn't react quickly enough. By the time Allied commanders realized what was happening, German tanks would already be behind them, cutting communications, sowing chaos, paralyzing decision-making. On May 9, 1940, German forward units received code word Danzig. The attack would commence at 5:35 a.m. the following morning. Soldiers checked equipment, wrote final letters home, tried to sleep. In France and Belgium, Allied forces maintained routine. Some units stood down for the evening. Officers attended staff meetings, planning deployments for the inevitable German attack through Belgium. Intelligence officers reviewed the same reports they'd analyzed for months. Everything pointed to the Ardennes. Everything, and still nobody believed it. May 10, 1940, 5:35 a.m. The Western Front exploded. German artillery opened fire along a 200-mile stretch from the North Sea to Luxembourg. Paratroopers dropped onto Belgian fortifications. Gliders landed troops atop supposedly impregnable fortress Eben-Emael. Luftwaffe bombers struck Allied airfields, destroying hundreds of aircraft on the ground. And in the Ardennes, Panzer Group Kleist began rolling forward. 7 armored divisions, 41,000 vehicles, a steel column stretching 70 miles, pushing into terrain the French High Command insisted was impassable. The first Allied intelligence reports arrived at Château de Vincennes at 7:15 a.m. on May 10th. German forces attacking across broad front, heavy assault in Belgium, airborne operations against fortifications. Gamelin nodded, unsurprised. "So it begins," he murmured. "Execute Plan D." Lee! Within hours, French mechanized divisions and the British Expeditionary Force surged into Belgium, racing to establish defensive positions along the Dyle River. It was exactly what they'd rehearsed for months, exactly what the captured documents said they'd do. And exactly what the Germans wanted. By noon, reports from the Ardennes began filtering in. Strong German mechanized columns moving through Luxembourg and southern Belgium. French cavalry screening forces, light reconnaissance units equipped with motorcycles and armored cars, encountered lead elements of panzer divisions near the Belgian border. Skirmishes erupted. The French cavalry, outnumbered and outgunned, fell back. More reports came in, large numbers of tanks, endless columns of vehicles, artillery, engineers. This wasn't a feint, this was a major attack. At 2:30 p.m., a French cavalry colonel reached headquarters by field telephone, his voice tight with urgency. "They're coming through the forest in massive strength, hundreds of tanks. They've pushed through our screening forces like we weren't even there. Sir, this is the main effort. They're heading straight for Sedan." The staff officer taking the call frowned. "Colonel, verify your numbers. Hundreds of tanks through the Ardennes is impossible. You're likely seeing reconnaissance elements exaggerated by combat conditions." "I know what I'm seeing," the colonel's voice cracked. "I've been fighting them for 6 hours. These aren't scouts. These are panzer divisions, multiple divisions, and they're not stopping. We need reinforcements, anti-tank guns, air support. If they reach the Meuse..." "Maintain position, Colonel. Reinforcements will be dispatched when the situation clarifies." The line went dead. That evening, Gamelin reviewed reconnaissance reports in his underground command post. Situation maps showed German forces attacking into Belgium as expected, but also significant activity in the Ardennes. His chief of staff, General Alphonse Georges, looked troubled. General, the Ardennes reports are consistent across multiple sources. The Germans have committed substantial armor there. If they reach Sedan, Gamelin interrupted, they'll face the Meuse River, a formidable natural obstacle, and our Second Army defending the far bank. Tanks don't swim, Georges. They'll bog down trying to cross, and we'll destroy them. This is still a diversion, pulling our attention from Belgium, where the real battle will be fought. But Georges wasn't convinced. Neither were younger staff officers clustered around intelligence maps, counting red pins, marking German armored divisions, most clustered in a narrow sector aimed at Sedan. One captain muttered to a colleague, "They have 7 panzer divisions there. We have second-rate infantry and almost no anti-tank guns. If those documents were real, they were fake," his colleague whispered back. The general said so. "You want to contradict him?" On May 12th, Panzer Group Kleist reached the Meuse River after traversing the Ardennes in just 2 days, faster than even optimistic German planning projected. French screening forces had collapsed, unable to stop or even significantly delay the German juggernaut. Now, along a 15-mile stretch of river near Sedan, German tanks, artillery and infantry massed for the critical crossing. Across the river, French Second Army, mostly reserve divisions, older soldiers called back to service, equipped with First World War-era rifles and minimal modern anti-tank weapons, dug into positions and waited. The French defenders weren't cowards, they were simply unprepared. Their divisions had been rated Series B, lower priority for equipment, training and reinforcements. Many soldiers were over 40, veterans of the previous war, but not trained for modern mechanized combat. They possessed 47 anti-tank guns to defend 15 miles of river, roughly 3 guns per mile against over 1,000 German tanks. Artillery ammunition stocks were low because logistics officers hadn't expected serious combat in this quiet sector. Air support was non-existent. Most French aircraft were committed to Belgium. May 13, 1940, became the decisive day of the campaign. At 7 a.m., the Luftwaffe arrived. Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, their sirens wailing, plummeted from clear skies, dropping bombs on French positions with terrifying precision. Wave after wave struck bunkers, artillery positions, communication centers. The bombardment continued for 8 hours straight, the most intensive close air support mission in military history to that point. German artillery joined in, 1,400 guns hammering French defenses. The noise was apocalyptic. Soldiers crouched in bunkers, hands over ears, praying for it to stop. At 3 p.m., German assault troops crossed the Meuse in rubber rafts under covering fire. French defenders, stunned and disorganized by the bombardment, offered sporadic resistance. Some bunkers fought back fiercely, others abandoned positions, fleeing inland. By nightfall, German engineers completed pontoon bridges, and tanks began crossing. The Meuse, the obstacle French planners insisted would stop German armor, had been breached in less than 10 hours. French Second Army disintegrated. Units lost communication with headquarters. Officers couldn't contact neighboring battalions. Soldiers retreated without orders, panic spreading like wildfire. Rumors raced through French ranks, German tanks everywhere, thousands of them, unstoppable, paratroopers behind our lines, fifth columnists sabotaging communications. The rumors were mostly false, but truth didn't matter. Fear became a weapon more potent than tanks. At Château de Vincennes, Gamelin received reports with mounting alarm. Sedan front breached, Second Army in retreat, German armor exploiting westward. He ordered counterattacks, but coordinating responses from his communications-starved bunker proved impossible. Orders took hours to reach field commanders. By the time French units moved to counterattack, German panzers had already raced past, leaving French forces attacking empty space while the real threat drove deeper into Allied rear areas. German commanders were stunned by their own success. On May 14th, panzer divisions broke into open country west of Sedan, facing virtually no organized resistance. The hole torn in Allied lines was 50 miles wide. Behind the panzers, French armies in Belgium remained intact, powerful and dangerous, but utterly cut off from strategic direction. Gamelin's communications network, designed for methodical First World War-style operations, couldn't cope with warfare moving at 60 miles per day. British and French commanders in Belgium began receiving fragmentary, contradictory reports. Germans at Sedan, Germans past Sedan, Germans racing west, German tanks at Amiens. Impossible. That's 100 miles behind the front. Confusion paralyzed decision-making. Units held positions in Belgium, waiting for orders that never came. Meanwhile, German panzer divisions executed exactly what the captured documents had outlined. Breakthrough at Sedan, exploitation westward, race to the Channel. The Allies possessed the playbook. They'd read it, studied it, and convinced themselves it was impossible. Now, impossibility crushed them. May 20th, 1940, 10 days after the invasion began. German panzer divisions reached the English Channel near Abbeville, completing a 200-mile drive that severed the Allied armies in two. North of the German corridor, the entire British Expeditionary Force, 3 French armies, and Belgian forces, over 1 million men, were trapped in a pocket with their backs to the sea. South of the corridor, remaining French forces scrambled to establish defensive lines protecting Paris. The catastrophe was total, unprecedented, and entirely predicted by documents Allied intelligence had possessed since January. In London, Prime Minister Winston Churchill, in office barely 10 days, reviewed situation maps with mounting horror. "How did this happen?" he demanded. His military advisors had no good answer. The intelligence was there, the warnings were explicit. But institutional inertia, doctrinal rigidity, and peacetime thinking had blinded Allied commanders to reality, until reality arrived in the form of panzer columns racing through supposedly impassable terrain. American military observers in France watched with professional alarm. Colonel William Donovan, future head of the Office of Strategic Services, filed reports to Washington. The French collapse stems not from lack of courage or equipment, but failure of imagination and adaptability. They prepared to fight the previous war, dismissed intelligence that contradicted established doctrine, and paid catastrophic price. Modern warfare has fundamentally changed. Mobility, speed, combined arms coordination, and willingness to accept risk now trump static defense and methodical operations. The evacuation from Dunkirk, Operation Dynamo, rescued 338,000 Allied troops between May 26th and June 4th, but abandoned all heavy equipment, tanks, and artillery. France fought on for 3 more weeks before surrendering on June 22nd. The Battle of France cost the Allies 360,000 casualties, 1.9 million captured, and total strategic defeat. Germany, by contrast, suffered 45,000 killed. Losses smaller than some First World War battles, the disparity was staggering. Historians later calculated that had France reinforced the Ardennes sector based on the Mechelin documents, positioning just 2 armoured divisions and adequate anti-tank defences near Sedan, the German breakthrough would have been significantly delayed or possibly stopped entirely. The German plan accepted tremendous risk. Supply lines stretched dangerously thin. A determined counterattack in the exploitation phase could have isolated panzer spearheads. But counterattacks require coordination, communication, and leadership, all of which Allied command structures proved incapable of providing under crisis conditions. The psychological dimension proved as important as the material. German commanders embraced risk, trusted subordinate initiative, and empowered junior officers to exploit opportunities without waiting for approval from higher headquarters. French doctrine demanded strict adherence to plans, centralized control, and methodical execution. When plans collapsed, as they inevitably do in war, French command structures couldn't adapt. German commanders, by contrast, thrived in chaos, turning Allied confusion into operational advantage. For the United States, watching from across the Atlantic, the lesson was chilling. France possessed the world's largest army, extensive fortifications, and strong alliances. None of it mattered when facing an enemy that thought differently, moved faster, and exploited intelligence the defenders themselves possessed but refused to believe. American military planners began urgent modernization efforts, developing armored divisions, streamlining command structures, and emphasizing aggressive mobile warfare doctrine. The individuals involved in the Mechelin incident faded into historical footnotes. Major Reinberger survived the war in Allied captivity, haunted by the knowledge that his mission's failure and the Allies' subsequent dismissal of the captured plans contributed to Germany's greatest military triumph. Captain Roderick, the Belgian officer who saved the burning documents, received no recognition. Belgium fell so quickly that heroism became irrelevant. General Gamelin was dismissed in May 1940, replaced mid-battle, his reputation destroyed. He spent his final years insisting he'd been right. The Ardennes was impassable, the documents were fake, someone else must be blamed for the disaster. French intelligence officers who'd warned about the Ardennes threat found vindication hollow. Captain Payol continued working in military intelligence, helping organize French resistance networks. After the war, he wrote extensively about the failure, emphasizing that defeat came not from lack of information, but from institutional inability to accept information that contradicted comfortable assumptions. "We had everything we needed to win," he wrote in 1947. "We had the enemy's plans, we had time to prepare, we had resources. What we lacked was imagination, the intellectual courage to believe the enemy might do something we considered impossible." The Mechelin incident entered military history as one of the greatest intelligence failures of all time, not because intelligence was lacking, but because it was ignored. Modern military education uses the case to teach cognitive biases: confirmation bias, normalcy bias, expert overconfidence. The French High Command saw what they expected to see, dismissed what contradicted their worldview, and paid catastrophic price. By 1944, when American forces landed in Normandy, US, military doctrine had absorbed the lessons. American commanders emphasized flexibility, decentralized decision-making, aggressive exploitation of opportunities. Officers who showed initiative were promoted. Static thinking was discouraged. The intellectual flexibility that France lacked became an American military trademark: pragmatism over doctrine, results over procedure, adaptation over rigid adherence to plans. The captured documents themselves, charred and fragmentary, survive in Belgian military archives. Tourists can visit the crash site near Mechelen, marked with a small monument. The briefcase that should have changed everything is displayed in a museum. Silent testimony to how possessing knowledge means nothing without willingness to act on it. Intelligence analysts worldwide study the case, learning that sometimes the most dangerous assumption is dismissing a threat because it seems too obvious or too risky for the enemy to attempt. The final irony remains haunting. Germany's greatest gamble succeeded precisely because it seemed impossible. French commanders couldn't believe any rational military force would attempt the Ardennes operation, and that disbelief became Germany's greatest weapon. The Allies fought the war they expected, prepared for enemies who thought like them, and were destroyed by enemies who thought differently. In the end, warfare isn't decided solely by material strength, but by imagination, adaptability, and willingness to believe in possibilities that challenge comfortable assumptions. The briefcase that fell from the sky in January 1940 contained everything France needed to win. They just needed to believe it. If this story left you questioning how often we ignore warnings that challenge our assumptions, you're not alone. History's greatest lessons often come from its most preventable disasters. Hit that subscribe button and join our community exploring the untold stories that shaped our world. Drop a comment. What other obvious warnings has history ignored? Let's learn from the past together.